Hey guys, so similar to my previous hand trap analysis, I thought I'd take a look back at the premier events in the last year or so and map out the historical trend of the most played side deck staples based on the data. And before I continue, a big thanks to all of my sponsors, and of note, I am now also sponsored by Imperium Duelist, so make sure to use my code HAKUNA10 if you are shopping for some sweet playmats, deck boxes, sleeves, and more. Now, for those of you that are familiar with my channel, you'll know that whenever we have some premier Yu-Gi-Oh event, I typically provide a breakdown of the most played side deck staples among the topping lists. Now, looking back to November of last year, the events that I cover for these staple videos involve Luxury Gaming Series tournaments, which involve some of the best players in this game, then some remote dual YCS events, and once in-person events came back, we have the coverage of the recent YCS events as well as the TCG Championships. As you can tell, I don't have an event for every month in the past year because some months there just weren't any big tournaments. But these are the events that this current video will be based on when looking at the trend of the most played side deck staples. So the most recent event included is YCS Niagara Falls, which is basically the last major event before this new ban list. Now first, let's start with the trend of the median number of board breakers played in the main deck in the past year. And by board breakers, I mean any board wipes like Evenly Matched, or back row hate like Twin Twisters, or any monster negation like Droplets, and so basically any generic going second cards. The first event in this timeline is the Pack LCS, and this is where Tri-Brigade Lyrilisk was the best deck, and Dogmatic Invoke was still strong too, and where Sword Soul was first released. Now board breakers are typically played more so on the side, and we had a median of 0 board breakers in the main during this format. For the most part, it seems to hover around 3, although it did drop to 0 again in April with YCS Charlotte. If you recall, this format was when the 60 card pile list became very popular, involving the adventure token and DPE packages, and instead players are going for a ton of hand traps where the median number had spiked to 15 hand traps. But after that, we have come back to around 3 cards in the main, with Dark Ruler being the most popular board breaker in the main in the recent months due to Sprite. As mentioned earlier, board breakers are typically placed in the side deck, and as you can see, this has always been rather consistent, hovering around 5 cards in the side. We did reach a bit higher with a median of 7 at Euros because for that event, a lot of players were opting to go with this route rather than hand traps, although that trend reversed back for YCS Niagara. So now let's cover some of the most popular side deck staples in more detail, and let me help you interpret the graph along with the caveats that you need to know. So basically, the percentages represent the proportion of topping decks that played a certain staple, in this case Red Reboot, at whatever event for that month. So keep in mind that the denominator is different for each month depending on the number of players in that top cut and the number of topping lists that were actually available, so I would say don't focus too much on the exact percentages or the rankings, but more so the general trend. So with Red Reboot, it was more or less decently played where it dropped heavily in play at YCS Charlotte, again during that 60 card pile format where the top decks were Prank Kids and Sword Soul, where Red Reboot wasn't really doing much, and has since increased in play until it was actually the number 1 played side deck card at YCS Niagara, of course because of the rampant increase in powerhouse traps such as Eradicator, Deck Devastation Virus, Dimensional Barrier, and a Pointer of the Red Lotus. Sadly, this card will now plummet to 0 for the next event as Red Reboot most recently got banned, which would have been fine if they hit more traps along with it, but they didn't, so curious to see how the game will be like moving forward. So here's the last tribute to Red Reboot, rest in peace. Another back row hate to cover is Harpie's Feather Duster, which considering it has no restrictions or drawbacks to its use, has always been fairly played in any deck, whether main or side. Looks like it basically hovered around as the 3rd to 6th most played staple card, and now that Reboot is gone, this is the strongest back row hate card that we have available at the moment. The main reason why Feather Duster may not be a given card to always play on your side is that depending on the format, you may just really need quick play form of back row instead, such as when Anti-Spell Fragrance was heavy in use. Now let's cover some monster effect negation cards such as Dark Ruler No More. It's pretty interesting how this card flipped back and forth in terms of how often it was played in top cut deck lists, and I would say earlier this year it had lost popularity because of the abundance of Scythe locks that were happening and you needed a quick play version of monster negation instead. However, it of course has its benefits as well, such as in more recent months where it even was the most played staple as of Euros to combat Sprite and Tears, although its popularity had fallen off a bit as of the most recent event in YCS Niagara, but I'm sure it will be a key board breaker to have in your deck for months to come. The other side of the coin, so to speak, with Dark Ruler is Forbidden Droplet, which really saw a huge uptick in play earlier this year because of the aforementioned Scythe locks, and Prank Kids was the best deck at the time in January, and while they did not Scythe lock, the Battle Butler pop effect was something worth using Droplet for as well. Funnily enough, it sort of has the inverse relationship with Dark Ruler because now in recent months, it's more efficient to use Dark Ruler to negate everything since we're not seeing standby phase Scythe lock as much, and with Dark Ruler, at least we don't have to potentially discard any cards. But these are format dependent cards in a way, so I'm sure we'll see Droplet go back up in usage once some other degenerate quick play monster effects come up that we have to deal with. Next is Evenly Matched, which arguably is the best board breaking card in terms of the number of cards it can remove, although at the cost of your battle phase. Something interesting I always noticed with Evenly is that despite being a strong card in a lot of formats, it was never really a unanimous pick as part of your side deck like a lot of the cards listed in this video. In a way, it also depends on the deck that you play, because for some strategies you may not be able to afford to lose that battle phase, or maybe you can make Zeus very easily and you prefer to go with that route instead. While in early 2020 this card was thought to be power crept by Lightning Storm, it managed to hold its own utility and is still a worthy card to be run. Speaking of Lightning Storm, we have been seeing a rather decline in play of this card, particularly in the recent months. For one, the top decks right now in tier limits and Sprite don't have too much back row, and at least for tiers, if you blow up their trap, then it might just trigger their effect anyways. Once the format becomes back row heavy again, then of course this will increase in play, so definitely hold on to your Lightning Storms, it will come back in use again regardless. Next, let's cover more back row removal in Twin Twisters. So what's interesting with Twin Twisters is that it sort of shares an inverse relationship with Cosmic Cyclone in a way. For example, Twin Twisters became quite popular earlier this year because of the abundance of prank kits and flu wanderees, where their powerhouse cards in Pandemonium or Dreaming Town can only be activated in the main phase, so in order to shotgun and try to pop them in draw or samba phase, Twin Twisters was better than Cyclone, as you were able to hit 2 cards instead of 1 and have a better chance at sniping the card. But at the same time, the play in Twin Twisters has declined sharply lately, with the key reason being Mystic Mine and the potential protection effects it will have through the likes of B-Cop, the runic stuff, or the good old fashioned field barrier in rare cases you face actual Mystic Mine burn. Conversely, you see that Cosmic Cyclone has the opposite pattern, at least for the recent months, to snipe out that Mystic Mine, not to mention being able to banish is generally more favorable, and the 1000 life point cost is usually easier to pay than having to discard a card like Twin Twisters as well. But of course, we could be in formats where we need both Cosmic Cyclone and Twin Twisters a lot, such as when Anti-Spell Fragrance is in heavy use, so definitely make sure to have both handy moving forward. Now, Super Poly is more of a format specific card, and it actually saw virtually no play from end of last year to beginning of this year. But as of spring of this year, such as in May where Branded Despia made their introduction, most of those lists were playing Super Poly and gave rise in popularity of this card again. In the recent months, this card is seen more so in tier limits as a key staple main deck card, not to mention other decks such as Sprite playing it as well. With the release of Garura in Power of the Elements that has allowed Super Polying to become easier, it's no surprise that this card is seeing more play in premier events currently than earlier in the year. And lastly, we have Mystic Mine, a very hot topic card since it realistically should have been banned for promoting degenerative gameplay. Now, Mine itself has never been a unanimous card to play in the main or side, primarily because it does depend on the deck that you play, since not every strategy can play this because you want to have an easy out to your own Mine. Now in March 2022, I have Mystic Mine being played at 0, and I'm not sure if that's an error on my part when I was collecting data in that month. There probably was at least one list running it, but ultimately I guess that month there wasn't much Mine being played. At Euros, it was seen in a quarter of the topping lists and also notably took some matches on its own. And while it did decline slightly in play as of the most recent event in YCS Niagara, hopefully it does one day get banned. Alright guys, I know there's a lot more staples that could be covered, but unfortunately I can't possibly cover everything, so hope you enjoyed that little history by the data for the most played side deck staples. Let's see how this changes with the upcoming events under the new ban list. You can also check out a similar video but for hand traps that I made a couple of months ago, links in the description. As usual, a big thanks to my Patreons, Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Barrelord, Spooky Boogie, and Stephen Phillips as always for supporting the channel. You guys are really awesome. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, link down below. Take care guys.